Hey guys, Ewan here with the Old School Labs, and in this video we're gonna talk about the current Mr. Olympia champion Big Ramy once again, who happens to be the biggest freak of all the bodybuilders. He's the biggest one, and he happens to be the Mr. Olympia. Weird? Well, not really, that usually was the case. For example, Ronnie Coleman, in his era and in the history of bodybuilding, the biggest bodybuilder ever. He was the champion. Dorian, the biggest of his era. Arnold was also a size freak back in the day. Lee also much bigger than guys like Labrada and Rich Gaspari and so on. Cutler, he was a size freak for sure, but he competed against Marcus Ruhl, for example, who was bigger. And then you also had guys who were champions, but weren't the biggest, like Dexter Jackson, Phil Heath, Brandon Curry, Sean Roden, and so on and so forth. But there was a lot of very dominant bodybuilders, Mr. Olympia winners, who were also the biggest in their era, or in some cases, ever in history. And now we're gonna talk about Big Ramy, who is the biggest in his era, and maybe even biggest ever. But let's say Ronnie was a little bit bigger, because Ronnie was about the same weight as Ramy was when he won the Mr. Olympia. They were both 290. Although Ronnie was sharper, he was more shredded, and that's why he was smaller. So if Ronnie came in the same condition as Big Ramy, he would probably be much bigger, much heavier. And the same thing goes kind of with Dorian. Dorian was shredded to the bone. He could have showed up with his 6 weeks out conditioning, and I think it would still be better than Big Ramy's conditioning at the Mr. Olympia, or at least the same. But no, he competed at like 255, 260. Unlike Ramy, who was 290, but he was shredded like a middleweight, like he says, like shredded to the bone. So he could have been, bigger, fuller, but with less conditioning. However, that's not the point. The point is, how would he fare against the size freaks, the biggest bodybuilders that didn't get the chance to compete against Big Ramy? So let's see. Let's start with my favorite bodybuilder of all time, Dorian Yates. This is what I was talking about, 6 weeks out. 6 weeks out right here. He was more conditioned than Ramy is. Yep. And take a look at his conditioning on stage. Take a look at the sharp, deep abs. Big Ramy didn't have this. He wasn't this dry. And his waist wasn't this small. Here is Dorian again, 6 weeks out. I think this is better conditioning than Big Ramy on stage. At least very close. So what do you think? Who looks better here? They are both very massive. Dorian has better maturity, Ramy has better arms, but this is what makes a big difference. Back, especially that lower back. Take a look at how many details are there on Dorian's lower back. The lats are so separated, the Christmas tree is amazing, and this is what makes him such a complete bodybuilder, because not many bodybuilders have that much muscle in the lower back region. It was something that set Dorian apart of other bodybuilders, and it would definitely expose Big Ramy's flaw, weakness, call it whatever you will, hole in a physique. Dorian kind of didn't really have those. I mean, yeah, his arms weren't super dominant, but that's not a big weakness. The arms are not something that wins the shows. Back and legs, that's what it is, and Dorian has better back. Dorian was huge, though he wasn't as full and as round as Big Ramy. And in today's bodybuilding standards, fullness is kind of a standard. I mean, it's kind of very important. If we saw this kind of physique on the stage against Big Ramy, I'm not sure who would win today, but if I was a judge, I would definitely go with Dorian. Yep, he wasn't that full and round, but these deep cuts, this kind of crazy conditioning, this dry, grain look, that would definitely blow me away. And people say, who saw Dorian on stage, that he was way more dominant in person, that he looked way more amazing. So imagine that, if he looked freakier than this as far as conditioning. Dorian versus Ramy, that was a close call, but should we even try and compare Ronnie versus Ramy? Is it necessary? I don't think so. I think this is just, it's not even close. It's not even close. Yeah, Big Ramy is big, but he's nowhere near as good as Ronnie. So if you're comparing Ramy, who is one of the biggest freaks of all time, against Ronnie, who is also one of the biggest freaks, what else would you need but to see this photo right here? Yep, not even close, not even funny. Ronnie wasn't only big, no, he was super shredded as well, completely shredded, the best bodybuilder of all time. And here you can see Cutler as well. in his 2001 edition, which many people consider his best ever. I personally like it the most. It was the most aesthetic version and very conditioned version of Jay Cutler. His waist was kind of small at that time, and then when he regained his title in 2009, he was more conditioned, but he was a bit thicker waisted, so I don't think that was his best ever, but he was more conditioned, so we're gonna go with that one because he was more conditioned. Oh yeah, 2009 was also the year when he did that famous quad stomp pose, and take a look at the conditioning, take a look at the details in the quads, the feathers everywhere, the lower abs were so deeply separated. He was super conditioned everywhere. He was just shredded this year. Yeah, his waist was a bit thicker than before than in 2009, but he was shredded and he was round. He was big. He was a size freak. More of a freak than Big Ramy? Probably not, but he was really round. For his height, for his weight, he was also very shredded. Take a look at the glutes and the hamstrings here. He also had some lower lats problems, probably the same kind that Big Ramy had, but overall he was more conditioned. He had better lines, he also had more maturity to the muscle. I think he was a better bodybuilder than Big Ramy. It wasn't as big of a difference like it was between him and Ronnie, but I think he was better again. Now here also you can see Greene from 2009. That wasn't his best yet, he was still young at this point. Later, he flourished completely, he was at his best. And guys, if you know my top 5 bodybuilders of all time, Greene is my 5th best bodybuilder ever. I don't think he's overrated. I think if you put all the bodybuilders from all eras on one stage today, I think Greene would end up being 5th, and I think he is better than Big Ramy. Just take a look at his quality. He wasn't better than Heath. Phil is my 2nd best bodybuilder of all time, but take a look at the quality. I mean, take a look at the glutes and the lower back. Who had lower back like this? The quad sweep. Take a look at this pop, and it's insane. Look at his side chest. Take a look at this monster of a bodybuilder, Kai here. He was a size freak for sure, but he had better conditioning than Big Ramy, and he was overall more complete. Sure, his traps weren't super dominant, and his forearms, but who really cares about those muscles? I mean, everything else was just insane. What mattered was great. And here you can see Heath, of course, on the left, and I don't think he's a size freak, but we will compare him just for fun. And also on the right side you will see Dennis Wolf, who kind of was a size freak because he was very tall. However, Greene stands there in the middle, looking like an absolute tank of a bodybuilder. He's big, he's shredded. He has that maturity, he has the graininess, he is better than Big Ramy in my opinion. Dennis Wolf, his best placement was 3rd after Phil and Kai, who were in top 5 best bodybuilders of all time, but I think the gap between these 3 guys, I mean between him and Kai and Phil, was rather large, so I don't think he was ever really close to cracking the top 2. Big Ramy won the Mr Olympia. And Dennis, he was a size freak. I mean, he was very tall, and for his height, he looked amazing, but he still didn't have that completeness of a physique. You know, he had kind of a few gaps. So I don't think he had. I mean, he had high lats. His arms weren't super full. His calves were really bad, but that's not really that relevant. But overall, he was a little bit too tall for an open bodybuilder. He looked great, sure, but he didn't have that roundness that shorter bodybuilders have, so I think Ramy beats Dennis Wolf. Let's mention Heath very quickly. He was not a size freak, but he was a 3D freak. 2nd best bodybuilder in my opinion after Ronnie Coleman. Much better than Big Ramy, but only when he is on. Not even 100%, but at least 90%. 2020 version of Heath was not even 60-70% of himself, so that's why he lost against Big Ramy. Overall, him at his best when he's on, almost unbeatable. Ruhl. Now, this is a freak. This is a size freak. If you're talking about size freaks, you gotta mention Ruhl. Though he probably wasn't as big as Ronnie Coleman. He didn't have those full legs like him and big arms, but I don't think many people had freaky chest like Ruhl, and just the freaky look, the freaky type of look, and size for sure. The biceps were super peaky and the chest was insane, the shoulders were crazy, and he had no neck. Though, is he a better bodybuilder than Ramy? I don't think so. I don't think he was as complete as him, but was he more of a freak? I think there is nobody that is as freaky as him. Maybe he doesn't look this super impressive when he stands next to Ronnie Coleman, for example, because Ronnie is just special, but Ronnie was more aesthetic. Sure, Ronnie was also a freak of nature, but not like Ruhl. When Ruhl walked on the stage, everybody was like, what the hell is this? You wouldn't be sure if this is even a human being, right? So if we talk about who's a bigger freak, just that, then I guess Ruhl would take that title home against anybody. But if you talk who was a better bodybuilder of all the freaks, then I think Ramy was better than this guy right here. I don't think he was more conditioned, especially like through the chest, through the shoulders, and some areas. But I think Ramy was more conditioned in the glutes, and I think he was just overall more complete, and he had better flow of physique. So yeah, Ruhl is one of the biggest freaks of all time, probably the freakiest of them all, but not better. Not better than Big Ramy, in my opinion. Whatever you guys think, tell me down below. Alright, next, Nasser somebody. He was kind of a freak. He came very close to winning the Mr. Olympia in 1997. By the opinions of many people, he deserved that victory. Whether he was really robbed or not, you cannot deny the mass that this guy possessed at that point with conditioning, with really good conditioning. He didn't really have the best proportions in terms of length of the limbs and some other stuff as far as the balance of the physique, but he was big, he was complete, he was matured, he was conditioned and everything. He had some flaws, but Big Ramy also has some flaws. It's a really close comparison. I'm not sure who was better here, but I would incline more towards Nasser because he seems to have been a little bit more proportionate and a little bit more conditioned. But it's very close, I'm not sure, it might be Ramy as well. I guess it doesn't hurt to mention Lee Priest, who was also a freak for his height though. He was a freak when he stood alone. When he stood next to the big guys, the tall guys, this would happen. He would just simply get dwarfed, and he was a freak for his height, but I wouldn't consider him a freak overall, not against Big Ramy, it wouldn't be fair, and I do think Big Ramy would beat him easily simply because of the size. What about the big guy on the right, Paul Dillet? He was definitely one of the biggest freaks of all time. Next to Marcus Ruhl, he has to be there in the mix. However, his posing was just horrible. In these photos, sure, it looks great, but when he would pose on the stage, it was just not good. And yeah, he was a freak, but from the front. From the back, it just looked silly. He had no back, absolutely no back. And that's why I don't think he would get close to beating Big Ramy. Nope, even though he's a freak, he was just enormous. With his back, what can you do against Big Ramy? Not a damn thing. This would be an interesting one. Gunther Schlierkamp, the guy who was able to beat Ronnie Coleman, the only guy who was able to beat him after he became the Mr. Olympia and before Jay Cutler beat him eventually in 2006. In the meantime, nobody beat Ronnie except Gunther in 2003. I think it was some show in Brazil. I'm not sure. I think this was when it happened. Gunther won the show and Ronnie was second. So Ronnie came off. He was not himself. He wasn't as big. He was as conditioned. This guy is a size freak. He is very tall. As you can see, as it is very common with tall bodybuilders, he doesn't have that roundness, the fullness, the round muscle bellies. But he has the size, he has the conditioning, he has the completeness, and that was enough to beat the greatest of all time. When he was a little bit off, but still, this was a huge accomplishment. Against Big Ramy, that would be close. That would be really close. And if it was the version that was able to beat Big Ramy in 2003 of Gunther Schlierkamp, if he was spot on, and Big Ramy was the way he was when he won the Mr. Olympia, I'm not sure, but I would be more inclined towards Gunther than Big Ramy. I guess it's worth to mention Flex Wheeler's 1999 version when he came much bigger. I wouldn't still call him a size freak like Big Ramy, but he was close. Who was better? Flex was better. Yeah, he was big here, but he was also conditioned and he had beautiful balance. He still had it, so I think he was better. Not saying that he was exactly a monster, a freak like Ramy, but if you're comparing, let's compare, he was better. Same thing kind of with Kevin Levrone. He was much bigger later on. This is 1995 right here. He was big, he was round, he was huge. And overall, I think he was more complete and a better bodybuilder than Big Ramy. He would beat him if he would be spot on. I'm sure I forgot to compare Big Ramy against some freaks, some big bodybuilders who were also very good. If I have, you guys remind me down below in the comment section, but I think that's gonna be pretty much it. It's a long list for sure, but as far as the bodybuilders who didn't get the chance to compare against Big Ramy, I think we kind of did that in this video, and you guys can get the idea what's my take on it. If you disagree with something, please tell me down below. Let's start the debate. Sure, just let me know what you think. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more videos like this. All the best, guys, and keep it old school.